So this is the second video of our continuing series that takes a look at prehistoric human societies. In the first video, we examined the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age period. In this era, we're going to take a look at the same village, but in the Mesolithic era, through the Madruga Works game Dawn of Man. The Mesolithic era, I think, is an era where you start to see human populations grow. Obviously, the village in the previous video, we're looking at about 20 to 30 people. We've tripled the population right here. And this is obviously going to be reflective in the clothing. It's reflective in the style of the weapons that they use, the tools, and also, of course, the kind of dwellings and structures that are available. So obviously the first feature of the Mesolithic era is, of course, a higher population. The second feature essentially is in the kind of tools that are being produced. Remember that each of these eras were basically so named for what people were making things out of. In this instance here, you can see a guy basically making some tools, what appears to be like flint knapping, which even today is a skill that people still continue to use. And so people would basically sit here at what's known as the crafting shed, and they would basically create various things that they needed, whether it be clothing, whether it be spears. By this era, of course, the spears had become more refined. They were basically making tools out of bone, obviously, and flint, as opposed to just stone. And so we begin to see that tools are more sophisticated. And so this is obviously a skill that's passed on through the ages. Other aspects of the village, obviously you can see a spiritual totem here in the center. Religion played a key role in the Mesolithic era, and we begin to see obviously various animistic spirits being worshipped. People of this time probably worshipped spirits of nature more than likely. Again, they didn't leave a written record, but from the cave paintings and from the archaeological evidence, it's safe to assume that they did have religion. And so this was something that was important to their life as far as the various gods that they worshipped. And certainly every tribe would probably have their own gods and goddesses that they would worship. They also had burial mounds, as you can see here in the center. These structures, of course, are where they would bury their dead. They also had a religious significance. The other aspect of burying your dead is important because obviously leaving corpses out is going to attract predators, which is something you don't want to do, especially in an era like this where you've got large, huge animals. But a quick note about the Mesolithic. One of the things that's a little bit different here in this game, you can see obviously woolly mammoths still running around. By the Mesolithic era, most of the large megafauna were going extinct. So things like the woolly mammoth, right, the elasmotherium over here, even woolly rhinos over here to the east, they would not have been making large appearances in the Mesolithic era. If so, their numbers were dwindling significantly to the point that by the Neolithic you really don't see them anymore. And this is largely because at the end of the Paleolithic era we have climate change which takes place. Really we begin to see, because the climate begins to shift, humans during the Mesolithic era have to shift as well. And some of them become forest tribes, some of them become something else. Here you can see, of course, a cave lion attacking a human, and as you can see,
fatality.
Obviously, something to keep in mind. Animals were dangerous, right? Things could still basically kill them, right? So obviously, I guess if I want to get vengeance, I can form a hunting party and go out and try to keep these predators away from my prey grounds, which is probably what I'll do here. So obviously this was something that humans had to do. They had to be territorial, and they had to be very careful about their hunting grounds because something could ultimately take it over, and then as a result they could be out of food. So ultimately I'll form a little hunting party here and hopefully take care of some of these cave lions, right, that have started moving in on my territory over here, right? But ultimately, yeah, you've also got other aspects of the Mesolithic era, new technologies that are going to become available. So one of the technologies that you're going to see in this era is the bow and arrow. Hopefully some of these guys over here are carrying one somewhere. Let's see, we've got some daggers, we've got some spears and harpoons. I think this guy's got one. Yeah, so obviously more primitive weapons like the spear were starting to be replaced with weapons like the bow and arrow. These guys obviously were ultimately going to start, equipping themselves with stuff that was a little bit better, and so they could ultimately do so as a result. So we'll take a look at this hunt and see how this works out. We got him. Alright, so we wiped those guys out. So now they'll butcher the carcasses, and obviously they'll bring those back. Now, as you can see here, humans are using sledges as well. This was a form of early transportation. Basically, it was, you know, something they would use to just slide across the landscape. They could carry heavy things. Obviously, something like a body, I would think I would want that on the sled instead of having to firemen carry that lady all the way back. But obviously, the computer decides to do as it will. And so, yeah, obviously, this is a way in which you could transport things over long distances instead of the old traditional just carry things. You'll also notice the different tools being used. This guy here you can see is carrying a sickle. This obviously was being created because people in the Mesolithic era started eating more cereals, especially wild grains that were available during this era. We're starting to see a diet that is richer in carbohydrates than necessarily just the proteins that were more common in the Paleolithic era. So that's certainly something. And obviously people ate more bread. This is an era where they started to actually crush bread with what was known as a mortar and pestle, and they would basically start consuming it as bread, something which of course would be a staple of diets for thousands of years. So all in all, I would say it's a kind of a mix of both. That's why it's the Mesolithic era. You've got, you know, people that are still largely hunting, but because the large animals are dying out, they're kind of transitioning to a more grain-rich diet. You've got populations that are larger than they were in the Paleolithic, but not quite as large as they would be in the Neolithic era. And so it's kind of this transitional period in between really the old Stone Age and that of the new as we get into the Neolithic. But there's many features that are common to the old and many features that are also common to the new.